The school hallway was filled with the usual chatter, a constant hum of voices drifting out of classrooms, mingling with the clattering of lockers and the shuffle of shoes on the polished floor. But for Ellie, none of it mattered. As she stood there, her heart pounded in her chest, the world around her blurred into a dizzying swirl. She tried to ignore the whispers, the stares, the pointed fingers, but it was impossible. She could feel their eyes on her, even though she kept her head down, her hand gripping the strap of her backpack so tightly her fingers ached. Ellie had been living with alopecia for years, a condition that made her hair fall out in patches. At first, it had been just a few small spots on her scalp, easy to cover with a hat or a careful hairstyle. But over time, the patches spread, and no matter what she tried, they wouldn't grow back. Eventually, she had to let go of the hats, the scarves, the constant attempt to hide her baldness. It was who she was, and she learned to embrace it, even if the world wasn't always kind. But today, in the crowded hallway of her high school, it felt like the world was anything but kind. Ellie knew exactly what was coming. She'd seen the way some of the kids looked at her in the past, half-hidden smirks, cruel whispers when they thought she wasn't listening. But today it was different. Today it felt personal. "Hey, bald girl," a voice called out, and Ellie froze. She recognized the voice immediately. It was Kylie, a girl who seemed to make it her mission to make Ellie's life a little more miserable every day. Kylie had always been the one to pick on Ellie from the moment she stepped into this school. She was popular, confident, and, as Ellie had learned over the years, incredibly mean. Kylie loved to turn Ellie's differences into a joke, something to laugh at, something to use to make herself feel better. Ellie didn't respond. She knew better than to try to engage with someone like Kylie. It only made things worse. But that didn't stop Kylie from approaching her, her group of friends following closely behind, snickering as they go. Ellie felt her stomach churn. She hated this. She hated how they made her feel like an outsider, like her condition was some kind of weakness to exploit. But what could she do? She was just one person against the whole school. "What's the matter, Ellie?" Kylie continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Lost your hair in the wash." Her friends giggled like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard, but Ellie wasn't laughing. She could feel her cheeks flush with embarrassment, and she fought the urge to run away, to hide somewhere where they couldn't see her. But she didn't. She wouldn't let them see how much they affected her. "Oh, poor Ellie," Kylie mocked, reaching out to pat Ellie's bare head. Ellie flinched, but Kylie didn't seem to notice or care. "Maybe if you just put on a wig or something, you wouldn't be such an eyesore." The words stung more than Ellie wanted to admit. She wasn't an eyesore. She wasn't broken. But when people like Kylie said things like that, it was hard not to start believing them. She opened her mouth ready to say something, anything, to defend herself, but before she could, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, leave her alone." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She looked up in surprise, her gaze falling on a tall figure standing in the doorway of the classroom. It was Jacob, a boy she'd known since freshman year. He wasn't one of the popular kids, nor was he a complete outcast. He kept to himself mostly, but Ellie had always noticed that he was different from the others. He was kind in a quiet, unassuming way, and unlike many of the other boys, he never treated her like she was some kind of joke. But this was different. Jacob had never spoken up for her like this before. It wasn't his fight, so why was he doing it now? Curly froze, the playful smile on her face slipping into an expression of annoyance. "Oh, look," she sneered. "The awkward learner decides to play hero. How cute." She flicked her hair over her shoulder and turned back to Ellie. "Don't worry, Ellie. We were just having a little fun." Ellie felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just some passing comment. Kylie had crossed a line, and now with Jacob stepping in, the tension in the hallway was palpable. It felt like something was about to break, but what? Would it be the fragile walls Ellie had built around herself? Or would Kylie get a taste of what it felt like to be on the other side of the ridicule? Jacob took a few steps forward, his gaze steady on Kylie. "You think it's fun to make people feel small?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "What's fun about hurting someone just because they're different?" Kylie's eyes narrowed, but Jacob didn't back down. Ellie could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Part of her wanted to cry out in gratitude to thank Jacob for standing up for her, for showing that maybe, just maybe, someone cared. But another part of her felt the weight of everything she had ever endured, and she wasn't sure if she could handle the consequences of this moment. Because this wasn't just about Kylie anymore. It was about Ellie, how she saw herself in the world, and how the world saw her. She had spent so much time hiding, protecting herself from the hurt. And now, for the first time, someone had opened up the door to something else. Something different. Could she trust it? Or was this just another cruel game? As Kelly opened her mouth to retort, the bell rang, signaling the start of the next class. The moment hung in the air, thick with anticipation. But before anything more could be said, Ellie turned and walked away. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, her legs moving on autopilot, leading her down the hallway away from the scene. She needed to think. But what did this moment mean for her? What would happen next? Would Kylie back down, or would she find another way to torment her? And Jacob, why had he stepped in? Ellie had always felt invisible to everyone, but in that instant she hadn't been. Someone had noticed her. Someone had cared, but would it last? The questions swirled in Ellie's mind as she made her way through the crowded halls, her chest tight, her breath shallow. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she was afraid of what the answer might be. Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders as she walked away from the confrontation. She had always been able to disappear into the crowd, to remain unnoticed. That had been her safety net, the way she protected herself from the harshness of the world. But now, with Jacob's words still echoing in her mind, she wondered if that safety net was still intact. Would Kylie come for her again? Would this time be different? And why had Jacob stood up for her? The school day passed in a blur. Ellie found herself distracted in every class, her mind replaying the moments in the hallway. Each time she thought she had pushed the memory away, it crept back into her thoughts, bringing with it a familiar sting. Ellie had always been different, and while she had grown to accept it, there were days when it felt like the world would never stop reminding her. Alopecia had taken her hair when she was just 10 years old. By the time she was in high school, she had learned to live with it, to cover the emptiness with scarves and hats, to keep people from asking questions she didn't want to answer. But this was different. Kylie's words cut deeper than they ever had before. It wasn't just the mocking. It was the look on her face, the way she acted like Ellie's condition was something to be ashamed of. And Jacob's interference. It was completely out of the blue. Ellie had known him since freshman year. He was quiet, a bit of an outsider himself, never one to draw attention. She had never thought of him as someone who would stand up to a bully, especially for her. So why did he? She found herself heading to the bathroom during lunch, needing a moment of solitude. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her scalp was bare, no trace of hair to cover the smoothness of her skin. She didn't recognize herself sometimes. It wasn't just the alopecia. It was the way people looked at her, the way she felt like she had to apologize for something that wasn't her fault. She tried not to, but the doubt always crept in. Was she truly okay with this, or was she just pretending to be? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Startled, Ellie turned to find a familiar face. Tessa, one of her few friends in school, standing in the doorway. Tessa had always been kind, never judging Ellie for her condition. But today, Ellie could see the concern in her eyes. "Hey, you all right?" Tessa asked softly, stepping into the bathroom and closing the door behind her. Ellie forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, just, the usual. Tessa leaned against the sink, crossing her arms. "Look, I saw what happened this morning. You don't have to hide it from me. I know it's hard, especially when people are so ignorant." She sighed, her voice sympathetic but firm. "But I also saw Jacob. He didn't have to do that." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "Yeah," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "I don't get it. Why did he step in? He's not exactly the type to get involved in things like that." Tessa tilted her head, considering Ellie's words. Maybe he's not the type to get involved, but maybe he's been watching. I mean, he's never been the kind of guy who likes to see people get picked on. Maybe he saw something that we didn't. Ellie shook her head, still unsure. "I don't know. It just feels weird. Like he sees me differently now or something. Like he's trying to help, but I don't even know why." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Is that so bad? You deserve help, Ellie. You deserve to have someone stand up for you, don't you think?" Ellie felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't allowed herself to think of it like that. She had always been alone in this struggle, dealing with the stares and the comments in silence. But now, for the first time, someone had seen her. Someone had actually done something. But what did it mean? Was this just a one-time thing? Or was Jacob actually trying to be her friend? "I guess so," Ellie whispered, but it didn't feel right. There was something else, something underneath the surface that she couldn't put her finger on. Something about the way Jacob had looked at her, the way he had stepped in when she'd least expected it. It felt like there was a story there that she didn't know, a reason why he had decided to speak up when no one else had. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Ellie and Tessa walked together to their next class. The halls were still bustling with students, the noise and chatter overwhelming Ellie's senses. But her mind wasn't on the crowd. It was on Jacob, and on Kylie, who would no doubt be waiting for her to slip up to give her an excuse to strike again. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every time Ellie glanced toward the hallway, she half expected to see Kylie lurking nearby, ready to make another cruel remark. But nothing happened. The rest of the day was eerily quiet, with no sign of the drama that had unfolded earlier. Ellie found herself almost hoping for something to happen, some kind of clarity to emerge from the chaos, but nothing did. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Ellie gathered her things and hurried out of the classroom. She was anxious to leave, to go home where she could have a few moments of peace. But as she walked down the hallway, she caught sight of Jacob again. He was standing by the exit, talking to a group of his friends, laughing like nothing had happened. But when his eyes met hers, the laughter seemed to fade. He gave her a small smile, the kind that seemed genuine, and Ellie's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to do. Did she say something? Did she thank him for what he had done? Or would that make things awkward? Was he just being nice because it was the right thing to do, or was there something more? Before she could figure it out, Jacob turned his attention back to his friends, and Ellie was left standing there, her mind spinning. She didn't know what this meant, but she knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same. The question was, would it be better or worse? And as Ellie made her way to the exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Something big. She just didn't know what. The next few days felt like they were dragging on for Ellie. Every time she saw Jacob, there was that lingering question in her mind. Why had he stepped in for her? His face had been so calm, so composed, but his actions didn't match what she thought she knew about him. Was he doing it out of pity? Or was there something deeper? She caught glimpses of him in the hallway, always with his group of friends, laughing and joking like he hadn't just become her unexpected defender. He hadn't brought it up, and neither had she. It made Ellie wonder if maybe it had been nothing at all. Maybe he was just trying to be kind, and now that the moment had passed, he'd moved on. But Ellie couldn't move on. She couldn't stop thinking about it, and she couldn't stop remembering the look in Jacob's eyes when he had stood between her and Kylie. There was something about it, something that made her feel seen in a way that she never had before. But the feeling of being seen was both a comfort and a burden. Ellie had grown used to blending in, to being unnoticed. If you're invisible, no one can hurt you. If you're invisible, you don't have to face the world's judgment. But Jacob had shattered that illusion. Now he was watching her, and she was watching him, and neither of them knew how to handle it. Kylie, on the other hand, hadn't forgotten. Ellie had hoped that the confrontation with Jacob would have put an end to the bullying. But when Ellie saw Kylie the next morning, there was a cold smile on her face, the kind that made Ellie's skin crawl. It wasn't just the usual teasing or whispering anymore. Kylie was making it a point to make Ellie's life miserable, even more so than before. Every glance, every word from Kylie felt like a jab to Ellie's already fragile confidence. And the worst part, she didn't even need to say anything. The looks, the quiet whispers, the way people started to avoid Ellie again. It was as if Kylie's words still carried weight, even without her speaking them aloud. Ellie's thoughts were interrupted by Tessa, who walked beside her as they headed to their next class. Tessa had always been a steady presence in her life, someone who made her feel normal, even when everything else felt out of place. "You good?" she asked, her voice light, but there was an edge of concern that Ellie could never miss. Ellie shrugged, trying to play it off. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Tired? Or are you tired of putting up with people's crap?" Ellie stopped walking for a second, looking at Tessa. "It's not just that. It's Kelly. She won't let it go, Tessa. I thought maybe it would blow over, but it's worse than ever. Every time I look up, she's there watching me. And the worst part is, no one seems to care. Everyone just stands by like it's normal." Tessa's face hardened, her usual easygoing demeanor replaced with something more serious. "That's not normal, Ellie, and you shouldn't have to deal with it alone. You shouldn't have to pretend like it doesn't hurt, because it does, right?" Ellie nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settle over her. It did hurt. It hurt more than she cared to admit, but even now she didn't want to show it. She didn't want to give Kylie the satisfaction of knowing that she had gotten to her. She had fought so hard to build this wall, to pretend that nothing bothered her, and now it felt like it was all falling apart. "That's the thing," Ellie said quietly. "I can't let it show. If I let her see how much it gets to me, it'll be over. She'll win, and I can't let her win." Tessa didn't respond at first. She just looked at Ellie, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about letting her win or not. Maybe it's about figuring out how to win for yourself, Ellie. how to not let her control how you feel about yourself. Ellie didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't sure she even knew how to begin. How could she stop caring about what other people thought when it felt like the world was constantly reminding her that she was different? But there was something in Tessa's words that made Ellie wonder if she had been going about it all wrong. Maybe it wasn't about making Kylie go away. Maybe it was about finding a way to make Kylie's words mean nothing. But how could she do that when it felt like every corner of the school was watching her, waiting for her to fail? It wasn't just Kylie. It was the whole school, it seemed. Everyone who whispered behind her back, who avoided looking at her, who acted like she wasn't even there. They didn't know what it was like. They didn't know how hard it was to be constantly aware of how different you were, how it felt to walk into a room and feel the eyes on you, even if no one said a word. That afternoon, Ellie found herself walking alone on the school's track after school, trying to clear her head. The track was quiet. At the sound of her footsteps on the gravel was the only noise that filled her ears. She liked it that way. It gave her time to think, to be alone with her thoughts. She didn't expect to see Jacob there. He was sitting on the beaches, a notebook in his lap, looking out at the empty field. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a moment, Ellie considered turning around and going the other way. But something stopped her. Something about the way he seemed so out of place. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the beaches. Jacob looked up when he heard her footsteps, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, and Ellie could feel the awkwardness in the air. But then Jacob closed his notebook and gave her a small smile. The same smile he had given her in the hallway a few days ago. "Hey," he said, his voice casual but warm. "Didn't expect to see you out here." Ellie nodded, feeling her stomach tighten. "Yeah, just needed to get away for a bit." There was a pause, and then Jacob's smile faded slightly. "Look, Ellie, what happened the other day?" He trailed off, as if unsure of what to say next. Ellie shifted uncomfortably, wondering if he was going to make things more awkward. "You don't have to apologize." No, it's not that." Jacob interrupted, his voice soft. "It's just, I don't know why I stepped in like that. I don't even know you that well. But when I saw what Kylie was doing, I don't know. I guess I couldn't just stand by." Ellie stared at him, unsure how to respond. This was exactly the kind of conversation she had been avoiding. But there was something in his eyes that made her want to believe him, even if she wasn't sure what to make of it. "I just don't want to owe anyone anything," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I don't want to feel like I'm weak, like I can't handle things on my own." Jacob nodded slowly, as if he understood. "You don't have to owe anyone anything, Ellie. I'm just trying to be a decent person. That's all." The silence returned, heavier this time. And as Ellie stood there, facing Jacob, she realized that things were about to change. She didn't know how or why, but she could feel it. The air was different, and she wasn't sure if it was a good thing or a bad one. What she did know was that whatever came next, she wasn't going to face it alone. The days following their conversation felt like a strange limbo. Ellie couldn't quite decide where things stood between her and Jacob. There was an unspoken tension between them, an invisible thread that both connected and separated them. Every time their eyes met in the hallway, there was a flicker of something that felt like understanding but also fear. Fear that things could go wrong. Fear that whatever fragile bridge they had built would crumble if they weren't careful. Kylie, of course, wasn't about to let things slide. She had made it her mission to make Ellie's life miserable, to tear down whatever little progress Ellie had made since the incident with Jacob. Kylie's whispers had gotten louder, her sneers sharper. Every time Ellie walked through the cafeteria, Kylie's eyes would follow her like a hawk tracking its prey. It wasn't just the blatant bullying anymore, it was the subtle, cruel things. The stares from her friends, the way they would laugh when Ellie accidentally dropped her books or stumbled while walking down the hall. It was as if everyone had been given permission to treat her like a target, and no one seemed to care. Ellie tried her best to ignore it. She kept her head down, stayed close to Tessa, and focused on her schoolwork. But every time she felt the weight of those eyes on her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world was closing in around her. The feeling of being trapped was almost suffocating, like she was a prisoner in her own skin. And every look, every whisper, was a reminder that she didn't belong. One afternoon, Ellie was walking through the schoolyard, her thoughts consumed by the constant barrage of taunts and looks. She had been trying to ignore them for so long, but it was getting harder. It was getting to the point where she didn't even know who she was anymore. Just a girl who couldn't escape the endless cycle of humiliation. She barely noticed the figure approaching her until she heard the familiar voice. "Ellie," Jacob called, his tone tentative. Ellie froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been so caught up in her thoughts that she hadn't seen him standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was palpable, as if the air itself was thick with unsaid words. "Hey," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I just wanted to check in. You okay?" Ellie hesitated. The question was simple, but it felt loaded, like he was trying to read between the lines of her carefully constructed facade. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. She wasn't fine. She was far from fine. But she didn't know how to admit it. Jacob studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't look fine," he said quietly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. Ellie felt a pang of irritation mixed with vulnerability. She wasn't sure why his words hit her the way they did. Maybe it was the fact that he saw right through her, or maybe it was because she didn't want anyone to know just how much the torment had started to affect her. "I'm fine, Jacob," she repeated, more firmly this time. "I just need to get to class." He didn't move though. He stood there, watching her with that same unblinking gaze, as if he was trying to figure out the puzzle that was Ellie. "You don't have to go through this alone, you know," he said softly. "I know things have been hard, but I don't need anyone's pity." Ellie cut him off sharply, the words rushing out before she could stop them. She regretted them immediately, but it was too late. She could see the hurt flash in Jacob's eyes, and it made her stomach twist. She hadn't meant to sound like that, but she didn't know how to let down the walls she had built around herself. Jacob took a step back, his expression flickering between surprise and confusion. "Ellie, that's not what I meant. I'm just trying to help." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I don't need help," she said, her voice cracking at the end, betraying the very lie she was trying to sell. "I'm fine." There was a long pause, and then Jacob nodded, his face clouded with uncertainty. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you change your mind, I'm here." Ellie didn't respond. She turned quickly and walked away, not looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her as she left. The guilt gnawed at her as she walked, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. She couldn't let herself open up. Not to him. Not to anyone. As the days passed, Ellie's world seemed to grow darker. Every time she thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Kylie's relentless bullying reached new heights, and soon it wasn't just the whispers and the stares. It was the comments, the taunts that sliced through Ellie's already fragile self-esteem like a knife. She found herself becoming a shell of who she used to be, afraid to speak up, afraid to stand out. Her sense of self-worth had all but disappeared, replaced by the constant echo of Kylie's cruel words. One afternoon, Ellie was walking home from school when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Startled, she spun around to find Jacob standing there. His face was serious, but there was something in his eyes that made her stop. Something urgent. "Ellie, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady. Ellie felt her heart race. She didn't want to face him, not now. Not when everything felt like it was falling apart. But there was something in his tone, something that made her pause, that made her wonder if this was the moment she couldn't avoid. "What is it, Jacob?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but she could hear the tremor in her voice. Jacob looked at her, his brow furrowed in concern. "It's about Kylie. I'm not going to let her keep doing this to you." Ellie's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" "I'm going to make her stop," Jacob said, his words firm, his voice rising with determination. "I can't just stand by anymore, Ellie. This has gone too far." Ellie felt a wave of relief and fear wash over her at the same time. Relief because, for the first time in days, someone was willing to stand up for her. Fear because she didn't know what kind of storm Jacob was about to bring down on Kylie and on herself. Before she could say anything else, Jacob stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Are you with me on this?" Ellie's heart raced. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she was strong enough to face the consequences of fighting back. But one thing was certain, she couldn't let Kylie win. Not again. "Yeah," Ellie said, her voice steadying as the weight of her decision sank in. "I'm with you." But even as the words left her lips, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just the start of a confrontation. It was the beginning of something far bigger than she was prepared for. Ellie's resolve was unwavering as she walked alongside Jacob, her mind still buzzing from the conversation they had just shared. She had agreed to stand with him against Kylie, to fight back against the torment that had haunted her for so long. Yet, as they approached the school gates, an unsettling thought began to gnaw at Ellie. What if they couldn't win? What if Kylie had more power than they realized? The next day, Ellie arrived at school early, her stomach twisted in knots. She had heard whispers in the hallways, the usual gossip that circled whenever something important happened. But today it felt different, darker. As she entered the school grounds, the tension in the air was palpable. The feeling that something was about to happen was undeniable. Jacob had promised that they would confront Kylie together. But as the bell rang and the first class of the day began, Ellie found herself alone in the crowded hallway. Jacob had disappeared into his own world, and Kelly was nowhere to be seen. It was a strange sense of calm before the storm, but Ellie didn't trust it. She knew that Kylie would never let her go unpunished for this. She had made that clear. Just as Ellie was about to step into her next class, a hand grabbed her wrist. She turned, startled, and found herself face to face with one of Kylie's friends, Megan. Megan's eyes were wide, her face unusually pale. Ellie's first instinct was to pull away, but something in Megan's expression made her stop. Megan wasn't acting like her usual confident self. There was fear in her eyes. "Ellie," Megan whispered, glancing over her shoulder nervously. "You need to be careful. Kylie's not backing down. You've stirred up something big." Ellie frowned, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Megan hesitated, biting her lip. "You have no idea what Kylie is capable of. She's been planning something, and now you've made her go too far." Before Ellie could respond, Megan quickly let go of her wrist and disappeared into the crowd. Ellie was left standing there, more confused than ever. What could Kylie be planning? And why did Megan look so terrified? The knot in Ellie's stomach tightened as she walked to class, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to explode. When the bell rang and the school day ended, Ellie felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had tried to prepare herself for what was to come, but now that it was here, she had no idea what to expect. She made her way to the lockers, her thoughts still tangled in the warning Megan had given her. Was it just a warning, or was something more sinister at play? Just as Ellie was about to turn the corner toward the exit, she saw a familiar figure, Kylie, but it wasn't the usual smug look on her face. Instead, Kylie stood with her back to the wall, arms crossed, looking as though she was waiting for something. Ellie hesitated, not sure if this was the moment she had been dreading or if it was a trap. But as she took a few cautious steps closer, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Kylie wasn't alone. Behind her, standing just out of sight, was a group of students. A mix of boys and girls. Some of them Ellie recognized from her classes, others she had never seen before. All of them were watching her, their eyes filled with something that wasn't curiosity. It was something far worse. Ellie's heart raced as she realized that Kylie had orchestrated a much larger scheme than she could have imagined. "Ellie," Kylie called, her voice dripping with venom. "I think we need to talk." Ellie felt her stomach churn. This was it. The moment she had feared. The feeling of being surrounded, trapped, overwhelmed. It all hit her at once. She wasn't sure whether to run or stay, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just another round of bullying. This was something bigger. "I'm done with you, Kylie," Ellie said, trying to steady her voice. "I'm not scared of you anymore." Kylie's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Oh, sweetie, you don't even know what you've gotten yourself into." She smiled wickedly, the kind of smile that sent shivers down Ellie's spine. "You see, I've been doing a little digging, and I know things about you, things that you've been hiding, things that, well, let's just say they could make all of this go away, or they could make it a whole lot worse." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand what Kylie meant, but the implications were clear. Kylie had found something about her, something personal, something she could use to destroy her even further. But what? What could Kylie possibly know? Before Ellie could process the words, Kylie continued, "You know, it's funny. You act like you're so strong, but deep down you're just like all the others, hiding behind that fake smile, hoping no one notices the real you." Ellie wanted to scream, to fight back, but the words were stuck in her throat. This wasn't just bullying anymore. It was psychological warfare. Kylie wasn't going to let her walk away from this, not until she tore down every bit of Ellie's dignity, piece by piece. The group of students behind Kylie shifted slightly, and Ellie could hear their low murmurs, the unsettling sound of their whispers. They were watching, waiting for something. Ellie's anxiety grew with every passing second, and she knew she couldn't just stand there, not like this. She had to find a way out. "You don't scare me, Kylie," Ellie said, her voice a little stronger than before, though she couldn't mask the tremor beneath her words. "Whatever you think you know, it's not going to change anything." Kylie's smirk widened. "Oh, Ellie, you really don't get it, do you? You've already lost. But it's okay, you'll figure it out soon enough." Before Ellie could ask what Kylie meant, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. She turned, startled, as a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Jacob. His face was set in determination, but there was something else in his eyes, concern and urgency. "Ellie, get away from them," Jacob called, his voice low but firm. Ellie froze. It was too late to back out now. The storm was closing in, and the stakes had just been raised higher than she could have ever anticipated. Kylie's smile faltered for just a moment, but then her eyes flashed with a new intensity, and Ellie realized, too late, that the confrontation wasn't over. It was only just beginning.